Hello? Can everybody hear me? Okay, first I would like to ask you all if you're comfortable doing this, if you can move up so that everybody is a little bit closer in. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, that's fine, but it just helps to bring everybody a little bit closer to the task force. So, okay. Well, greetings. I thank all of you for showing your dedication to the University of California, Davis by attending this meeting, this public meeting, or by tuning in to our webcast. My name is Catherine Colasar. I am the chair of the Graduate Student Association. It is unfortunate the circumstances that convened this task force, yet we hope that our recommendations will be the start of making UCD a better place for everyone. The members of this task force are linked to each other and to all of you by a dedication to this university. I would like to start by introducing Chair Renoso. Cruz Renoso has dedicated his life to public service, championing the underdog in civil rights, immigration and refugee policy, government reform, and legal services for the poor. He was the assistant director of the California Fair Employment Practices Commission and also served the federal government as Associate General Counsel of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission in Washington, D.C. In 1982, Renoso became the first Latino to be appointed an Associate Justice of the California Supreme Court. He was at UCLA School of Law, and then in 2001 joined the UC Davis School of Law. Renoso has also served as vice chair of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, as well as a member of the Select Commission on Immigration and Human Rights. In 2000, President Bill Clinton honored Cruz Renoso with the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the country's highest civilian honor, for his lifelong devotion to public service. Cruz Renoso has also been honored with the Hispanic Heritage Foundation's Hispanic Heritage Award in Education. And last year, he received UC Davis Medal of Honor, the highest tribute bestowed by the campus. Other members of the task force, we have two undergraduate student representatives. We have Tatiana Bush and Rebecca Sterling. We have a representative from the Academic Senate, Professor Eric Rauchway. We have a representative also from the Academic Senate from the School of Law, Alan Brownstein. From the Academic Federation, we have Carolyn Penny. From the UC Davis Staff Assembly, we have Peter Blando. We have Judy Sakaki, who was with UC Davis in Student Affairs. We have Dan Dooley, who is from UC Office of the President, and Penny Herbert, who is Director of Strategic Planning at UC Davis Health System. William McKenna from UC Davis School of Law. So now I will turn this over to Justice Renoso, who will introduce our report.
Thank you very much. And like my predecessor, I'd like to ask, can you hear me okay with this tape? I'm speaking particularly to the people in the back. They seem to say that we're doing okay. I'm very pleased to be here at long last to report to report to you on the very good work I think that the task force has done. It was our job to truthfully bring to the attention of the UC Davis community what happened. Despite the delays, I think we've actually done that, and we're happy that the final court order, in fact, permitted all of the report to be given to the community, with the exception of substituting some names with letters. So you have the full thinking and recommendations of the commission. I must say that I want to express my appreciation to my fellow task force members. They've worked very hard, and they've been very perceptive and insistent on getting answers that we needed. I'll mention that I want to thank the Kroll people also, the folk who were doing the actual investigation, because they worked with us. Quite often we'd had questions about the facts, about policies and so on, and they always responded to us. And indeed, this morning I got a call from the Chancellor who thanked the members for the work that we've done, and she says she's looking forward to working with the recommendations that we have included in our report. And I must say that we've been helped greatly by some staff members of the President's Office in Oakland, folk from the General Counsel's Office, and I want to particularly mention one gentleman, Kobe Crowder, who has worked with us from day one, in fact, still working with us, because indeed, as I mentioned a minute ago, some of the work will just begin. I very much regret, and apparently you do too from the applause I heard, the delay in getting this report to you. I think that the best interest of the community would have been to have the report to you as quickly as possible. Some of the delays were caused by negotiation with the policemen's union to see whether or not the Kroby investigators could meet with some of the police officers. That got resolved, but the greatest delay happened because of the lawsuit. Now, I don't particularly blame the lawyers who brought the lawsuit, or even the people who brought the lawsuit, because they brought it based on some legislation that has come from Sacramento. So my blame is on the legislators who have passed legislation that sometimes is referred to as the Policeman's Bill of Rights. But the reality is, as you can see in this case, that it does not permit the community to know exactly what happened, who's responsible for it, what can be done to correct it. And I think that that's a great disservice to the communities that deal with the police officers, who after all are public servants. And I personally feel that it's a disservice to the police. The police can only do their job if they have the confidence of people who live in the community. If there isn't that confidence, because as some people have asked me, well, what are they trying to hide when they have filed a lawsuit saying that they don't want this type of report to get to the people most interested in it. Our report has had the task, therefore, of answering the questions. Incidentally, many of the folk who were involved in this situation, from the Chancellor to others, I think proceeded in good faith, though they made, from our point of view, many serious mistakes, which we detail in our report. We had, as indicated, a quite diverse group of folk in our task force, and yet we reached a unanimous decision in terms of our recommendations and our report. So I think that's a good omen in terms of the strength of our report, both in terms of the facts that we give, who we say caused some of the problems, and what our solutions should be. Excuse me. Perhaps our whole report is capsulized by the first sentence in the report, when it says that the pepper spray could and should have been prevented, i.e. it should have happened. And yet the incident did happen. So our report, to a large extent, goes into examining why it did happen. And I'll just speak briefly to that. Since most of this time will be spent, I trust, with you folks asking questions, which is why the folk way in back were invited to come forward, because I think the mics are here closer. But let me give you a couple of examples. We begin by analyzing the role of the leadership team. That was the team, rather informal team, that got together with the Chancellor to discuss any number of serious matters that come up in the university life. However, we found that informal leadership team approach did not work on this occasion. It turned out that, in fact, What decisions were made by the leadership team was a matter of disagreement by some of the leadership members. Who made those decisions was not in agreement, and more importantly, even the basis for those decisions. Folks just ended up with many different understandings, and it's important, as the Crow report indicates and as our report indicates, that when a crisis like this comes up in a campus, it's very important to know who's in charge, who's responsible for what, and how it's going to be done. And sad to say that rather informal consensus building process that was followed did not work on this occasion. The responsibility was not just the chancellor's. The responsibility, it seems to us, went to all of the members of that task force, because if they had qualms about something that should happen, they had a duty to bring it to the attention of the chancellor. We particularly focus on the decision to have the tents removed from the campus, and we had at least one of the members of the leadership team speak for many minutes about how, in her view, that step should not be taken when it was taken, but somehow she wasn't listened to sufficiently. And the task force had some bad information. One officer thought that during the Marac Hall sit-in, practically all of the folk there were non-students, and in fact, that turned out to be not to be true. And I mention that because one of the concerns that the chancellor and the leadership team had was that there were too many, that there was a possibility that there were too many non-students in and around the tents, and that created perhaps some dangers to the students. And there was discussion about how could we explain to parents if something bad happened to their students. So there were serious concerns, and we acknowledged that, but we also faulted the leadership team for not looking at alternatives to going in at the time that they did, on the date that they did, to remove those tents. And we felt that the leadership team had a responsibility to, in fact, look at those possibilities. And then we looked at the practices of the campus police in terms of what their responsibility was. Looked at the responsibility of the police chief. If the plans as decided by the leadership team didn't make sense, it was her responsibility. It's a professional responsibility to bring that to the attention of the leadership team, and maybe they would have changed their mind if she had indeed brought that forth with the pressure that a police chief would have. And even after a decision was made, her own lieutenants and others within the police department said, you know, we just can't do it the way we've been asked to do it. You can't go in not expecting some problems if you might end up having to arrest people and so on, and yet those concerns, again, were not brought up were not brought before the leadership team. So as I've mentioned to more than one person, we aren't making anybody happy with our report, because we find that there's a lot that should have happened that didn't happen. With respect to the actual conduct of the police, there were just serious faults, if you will. The practice is to have a plan, which makes a lot of sense, and in fact they did have a plan. Unfortunately, the plan was inadequate, but even that inadequate plan was not followed by the campus police when they went into the area where the tents were. For example, the plan did not have in it the very important matter of what they were going to do with anybody who was arrested. And that turned out to be rather crucial in this case, because the reason that people formed around the arrestees was that they had no place to send the arrestees, so they just held them there. And students, many of them probably not even involved with a protest, and sort of went over to see what was going on. But with respect to the pepper spray itself, objectively, there was really no reason, we conclude, to have used the pepper spray. We assumed, because some of the officers said, well, they were a little bit scared because they they were surrounded. But in fact, when we looked at the tapes, when the Crow people looked at the tapes, we found out that they were not completely surrounded, that there was one officer who in fact took two arrestees through the students that were around. That is, objectively speaking, there was no basis for them to indeed have any fear or to have done what they did. And one of the reasons they did do what they did, particularly to spray, was to make a way to take the arrestees to where the cars were waiting for them to then take them, they had hoped, to a bus. Whether or not a bus was even exist, I forget, was the bus actually existing at the police station. I forget, there was something said about that. I think it didn't even exist. That is, they had hoped to have a bus, but it wasn't even in existence. So the spraying took place so the police could go through to take the folk they had arrested to cars that were waiting. In fact, again, it was shown that there was no danger. When the city police arrived, the campus police were able to take them through the crowd. The police officers, as I mentioned, took a couple of arrestees through the crowd. The crowd was not that thick, nor that challenging. So objectively speaking, that was our conclusion and as to the facts. And then, of course, our report goes into the matter of individual responsibilities in light of the facts that we looked at. And finally, of course, we come to the recommendations, which perhaps is the most important part. We note that our hope is that, in fact, we will be able to make even more firm the notion of the principles of community that UC Davis has in fact had for a while, and that folk who are at odds now will in fact be able to get together. So we recommend to the administration, that is the leadership team and the chancellor, that they develop rules ahead of time to how they will act when there's civil disobedience. And those rules have to be cognizant of any possible changes, and importantly, they have to take into account the right of students to free speech. They have to define what is considered violence, what is not. They have to define what the consequences will be of violating those rules. That is, a lot of thinking has to be done ahead of time. The leadership team has to have its own structure about how it proceeds, who the members are. Minutes have to be taken. It has to be very clear who's made what decision and what the action is going to be. And the structure, sad to say, of that informal approach simply did not meet the requirements of a crisis like the crisis we saw. And then, excuse me, we suggest that they have clear procedures about what to do if, in fact, there's a large demonstration. We do note that the development of large folk getting together to complain, as has been true in many cities recently, is somewhat of a new phenomenon. Sometimes the groups sort of pride themselves on not having a spokesperson. And in times past, there was always an identified spokesperson or persons that those against whom the protest was aimed at would then be able to talk to those folks. So I think that the university has to recognize those new developments and figure out exactly how to respond in such a way that it protects the rights of all concerned. And then with respect to the police, sworn officers have a special responsibility. They can't just go out and arrest anybody. They have to have a good basis for it. And sad to say, there was confusion in terms of even the basis for any possible arrests. For example, there was a rule, a university rule, that folk couldn't camp at night, but here folk were camping during the day. Well, was that sufficient enough basis for the police to make an arrest? Obviously, the regulations could be enforced by somebody, but could they be enforced by sworn police officers? So we recommend that there be a structures to that there even be a review of how many sworn officers we need on a campus. The role of the police officers on a campus is very different than that of a city or a county. And it may be that a campus would do better just having few sworn police officers and other officers who are trained but are not sworn police officers. And we recommend training, better training for officers when they're working on a campus, because, as I say, the role of a police officer on a campus is really quite different than in other locales. Indeed, this campus already had a group called Aggie hosts. These are students who work with the police officers, and we're suggesting that there be thought about maybe expanding that, because the students presumably understand how other students react, and they could be of help in that regard. And then we have a few recommendations, even though there's another committee that's actually making recommendations on statewide matters. We were asked to take a look at that, and we recommend again that there be special training, maybe even setting up an academy for the officers that work in campuses, because in our judgment their role is so different. And if an academy is set up, maybe it could even include officers who work for the state system, maybe the community college system. So the whole relationship of sworn police officers to the campus, I think, needs to be taken a look at. And very clear rules need to be made about interagency policies. That is, what happened here was that the campus had asked other campuses to send their police. Then the police chief here had asked her officers not to get in full gear. Then the officer said, wait, we can't go into a dangerous situation like this without full gear, and then she sort of gave in to them. In some ways, I've been thinking about this. I can understand that they had that concern, because officers coming from other campuses would indeed come with full gear, and yet when folk appear in full gear, there's a quick negative reaction by folk that see them coming. So we think that needs to be done. And finally, we have a formal recommendation that the President and the Regents look at the issue of the Policeman's Bill of Rights, because it has ill-served this community, and I have personally seen other situations where it has ill-served those communities, when folk can't find out without bringing a lawsuit and having subpoena power whether the officer did the right thing or the wrong thing, or whether things can be changed to make it better. So that's a quick summary, as you can tell, of a rather lengthy report on our part, and a lengthier report on the part of the Crow people. And I just want to mention one other thing to you. It's just of interest to me, and maybe to you too. The judge had said one time, well, you can make public certain parts of the report. And we got a lot of phone calls from the press, and we said, we don't think we ought to make it public at that point, because so much had been redacted at that time that we didn't think it would serve the purpose, though we could have made something public. I just want to mention, show you here, 2 pages of our original report, every single word redacted. So we thought that it would be a faulty step on our part to give you that report, and you wouldn't even understand the basis for our recommendations. But again, this just indicates to you the power that folk have to go in and get a temporary restraining order because of the legislation passed by people called legislators in Sacramento, and then giving lawyers really the legal right to go in and get a temporary restraining order. End of my sermonette. So now I'd like to turn it over to my fellow board members and invite questions, expressions of concern, and so on from you in the audience. Though again, the people way in back are going to have to I take it they're going to have to walk up to these mics. So let me open it up then for any questions or concerns that you might have. Mine was a truncated report. I trust it wasn't so complete that you said, we know everything now. Yes, sir. And identify yourself.
Yeah, my name's Alan Miller. I'm a resident of Davis.
Yes, sir.
The day after this happened, I went to the UC police station, and I demanded to talk to somebody, and I got the officer in charge. And he told me that there were rocks and bottles, and that there were a lot of non-students, and that all this would come out in the following week. I talked to dozens of people, and what I found out were the rocks were there to hold down paper in the wind, and the bottles were a pile for recycling. And the students were, the non-students were mostly alumni, a few townies, and pretty much people I all knew personally. Then you just said that, in fact, they were not surrounded when the police claimed that they were surrounded. And so what I'm saying is my concern is, and what I got out of what you just said, is the police lied to us. This was not initially a concern that I had. Hearing your report, the police lied to protect themselves, to protect their fellow officers. I can understand the tendency to do that. I think it is wrong. And I wondered if you had any comment on that.
I would have a lot, but I'd like to call on on my fellow taskmasters, see whether somebody would like to comment on this. Leon, do you have a reaction to that? Liam? And I think, yeah, you have my.
I think it's clear that the officers were wrong. To delve into their intent, I'm not in a position to do that. But it's clear that if they were basing their decisions on being surrounded by protesters, that was factually incorrect. They were wrong. If they were basing their decisions on these rocks, I think our conclusion was the same thing, that there were rocks. If there were rocks, those rocks were being used to pin down the tents. I think that if the decision was based on the protesters physically preventing people, the police officers from leaving with the arrestees, that was wrong, because police officers actually walked arrestees out of the crowd. So that's what I have to say about that.
Yeah. Somebody else? No. Let me just add a word. As you might guess, a lot of folk have talked to me about this. I talked to one expert who works with police departments. He said he had worked with 30 police departments. Of those, only one had the practice and the reality of what he thought every police department should have. And that is that if an officer did something wrong, the other officers will report that. He said 29 out of the 30 did not have that practice and that ambiance. They indeed had what's called a bunker mentality. That is an effort to protect one another. And so it may be that was happening here. What concerns me is that but for the reality of the Crow report finding, I think, something like 60 tapes about what happened, so they could really analyze what factually happened. Without that, I think folk would have a tendency to believe exactly what was said. And the first thing that the chief said was the officers used pepper spray because they were surrounded and they were fearful for their lives. Well, if without those rather dramatic figures that we saw, I think folk would have believed that, and that would have been the end of it. So in this case, what folk did to bring to the attention of the Crow investigators and us turned out to be very important. Next.
Hi. I was one of the 10 people.
Can you speak more into?
Sure. I was one of the 10 people arrested on November 18th, and I'm just wondering how much, if any, coverage there is about any misconduct that may have happened in the police station to the people or involving the people who were arrested.
Perhaps I should mention two things. One, there's a lawsuit, and so I assume that some of the folk indeed feel that they were hurt. Secondly, however, we have a specific request from the president not to speak to any discipline that should take place. To be frank in terms of what we think went awry, and we have been, but the disciplinary portion of it it takes place by an investigation within the university that'll decide who should be punished and who should not be. So that really was not our role. But you, oh, I'm sorry. So you can have. I'm being unfair. I didn't notice we had a whole group over there. So the next one will be over there, so we didn't comment on that. But we're very frank. I didn't go over that portion of the report where we say who's responsible for what, and we go down the line saying we think what went wrong here, we think that's what went wrong there. So we're very specific on that, and I think you'll find that portion very instructive. Okay, over there. Sorry about that.
Yes, I'm Robert Ostertag. I'm a professor here at Davis. One thing that jumped out at me in the report was your finding that the pepper spray that was used was not an approved weapon of the university police, and that they were also not trained in its use. So I have two questions. One, how did a weapon that they're not approved of for using and that they're not trained in using end up in their hands? And two, do they have other weapons over there at the police department readily available that they're not trained in and that are not approved?
Yeah, well, there's a requirement, as I understand it, that folk be trained before they use different pepper sprays. I've become an expert on pepper spray. I didn't even know that there were different pepper sprays, and this was a more, and in their protocol, they did have that some were trained to use a pepper spray, but it wasn't as strong a pepper spray as the one that was used. So your concern is really quite proper. We did not interview because, again, under the Policeman's Bill of Rights, we didn't have a subpoena, so we did not interview Lieutenant Pike. So we don't know his story. That is, why he had that, why he did not. I'm sorry to say that's one matter that we didn't find out about because we didn't have subpoena power.
Well, just to comment, if safety of students is the primary concern, and this, according to the university administration, the whole reason they went out and took down the tents is concern for safety. And given the fact that that pepper spray is considered a lethal weapon in certain circumstances, you know, the idea that an unapproved weapon in which people have no training are being used is a very, very serious matter.
And the irony is, as you notice in the report, that it wasn't even used properly. You know, so no, I agree with. Well, obviously, the task force agrees with you that all of that is very serious. Yeah, over here.
Yeah, my name is Jeffrey Wildanger. I'm a graduate student at UC Davis. I was also one of the people pepper sprayed, and I'm currently being prosecuted for, again, protesting on campus. Which brings us to the question of the lawsuit and possible retribution for that lawsuit. I guess I want to begin by first acknowledging the sort of humorous situation in which we were pepper sprayed with military-grade pepper spray, but pepper spray is actually banned under the Geneva Conventions as a chemical weapon. However, I more fundamentally want to pose the situation that after the scandal of the pepper spray incident, there was a large mobilization of people who wanted Katay to resign. There was a large agreement, both on campus as well as nationally and internationally. An academic boycott of UC Davis was being organized, pressuring Katay to resign because Katay, as being the chancellor of the university, bears ultimate responsibility for what occurs on the campus. And the delay of this report has effectively dispersed a lot of this energy and a lot of this anger, and caused a situation in which we are told again and again that there's investigations ongoing, various reports. The police are not cooperating with the various investigations, and once all these reports are published, then presumably justice will be served.
Yeah, excuse me, I just want to emphasize that many of those delays were caused by the statute passed by legislatures in a place called Sacramento.
I completely acknowledge that to be the case.
Okay.
I don't doubt that. I guess my question is, or what I'm confused about is why, when the reports are being delayed, we're still being harassed by the same administration, harassed and threatened by the same police force, and now being prosecuted and arrested by them. And I think that if we want to have a safe university, which I think that we all want to have a safe university, we need to realize that this is not the first time that riot police have been called on campus. That wasn't the first time that week that riot police have been called on campus. And that wasn't the first time that riot police have used so-called less than lethal weapons against UC Davis students on this campus. In my time here, in 4 years, I've been beaten up by the cops every single time, and I have bruises and scars to show from it. And I want an actual solution which would require the administration to be radically changed, if not for the most part gotten rid of, and the UCPD to leave immediately. And I'm wondering, as much as I acknowledge the importance of the research provided by the report and the greater information that will be gotten out by the lawsuit, what I really want to call for is people to unite around an idea of a genuinely safe university and a genuinely safe community. And I really question how interested the university is in having the situation when this entire building is surrounded by Aggie security, who the same week that the pepper spray incident occurred, a press release came out on Dateline UC Davis saying that now Aggie security will be armed with pepper spray as well.
Yeah, well, yeah, you're really speaking toward the future, and I wonder, Dan, do you have a comment on what you see, or what you hope will happen in the future, particularly in light of our report?
Well, first of all, I think the report acknowledges, both in the findings, the mistakes that were made, many of which you're raising concerns about. With respect to the police department, I just want to elaborate on the recommendation. The recommendation, and it gets to the earlier comment about why was a weapon that wasn't authorized and for which people weren't trained available. And we asked that same question, you know, how can this happen? And the bottom line is, we think there needs to be a complete review from top to bottom of the police department, of the training that's required, of the procedures and protocols and so forth, and that's all detailed in our report. So we also recommended that the objective here ought to be a university public safety operation that is a model for university campuses around the country, and not one that is designed around the more traditional city or county public safety model. So I mean, I think that gets at some of what you're saying. There certainly is also a much broader review going on of all 10 campuses and the various policies and procedures that exist, with the notion that it's time that we review those and make sure that they're contemporary, that they're sensitive to the various campus environments, and that changes are made where appropriate.
I can save the investigators some time. The vast majority of universities in the entire world, the vast majority, don't have any police on their campus at all. In fact, many of them bar police from ever entering campus. It's a very simple solution to the problem of UC policing. Eliminate the police.
Yes, I think we have a comment by a student. Yeah.
I don't know if this is working. So I know this is more task forces and committees that I'm mentioning, but I have attended several of the panels where we have asked the broader campus community what they would see as a police force. And there are a number of people who believe there should be no police force on the UC Davis campus, but there are also people here who believe there should be a police force for circumstances such as incidents of hate crime, someone to report rape to, and this is not in our report, but those will come out what the campus community thinks as a whole. So I am personally looking forward to hearing those committee recommendations to address that question.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Over there.
I'd like to comment. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Okay. Hi everybody. So my name is Vinson. I'm a staff researcher at here UC Davis. And it happens I was on the quad on November 18th. So I can tell that I saw a lot of stupidity from the cops. And you made a good point saying like it could have been avoided, but I like to say it could have been worse. Because it happens like the cops, in addition of the pepper spray, they also have paintball guns, right? And at some point, I remember perfectly because the two of them like raised their guns, ready to shoot. I was just in front of them, so I cannot forget that. And the problem with that paintball guns, like just a paintball guns, yeah? No. A paintball guns. You know what is that? Okay, whatever. So the problem with that, like you take a ball of that in your eye, you lose an eye, okay? So you could have a student losing an eye on the day, or a student or somebody else. So it could have been worse, okay? So I'm also concerned by the fact like some police officers make a lot of money, like I think Lieutenant Pike is making like 120,000 per year, so about like more than most of the tenure professor here. That doesn't make sense to me. So you mentioned like some police officers should have some training, that's right, but I think we need a minimum number of smart cops. They could be here just here at UC Davis or just Davis itself, that's a discussion. But what I saw on November 18th was an army of overpaid idiots. Yeah, I'm serious. Okay, now other things. Let's go beyond like what happened.
Yeah,
because
I'm sorry, I guess I'm not understanding the question that you have.
Okay, I got several comments and one question. So, but please let me make my comments first, okay? So then the question is, well, we had a protest. So what is a protest? The protest against the raising of the fees, right? So I'm really concerned because the administration here raise the fees and they say, well, you know, it's a tough situation, economic crisis. But at the same time, they raise the salaries of the top administrations. That doesn't make sense to me because basically students are paying more, but at the same time, the top administrators are making even more money. So actually, I made that point on the academic senate like back in early December. I made that point too. So what do we have? Yes. So first, increase of salaries for administrators is unfair because students pay for that, and it's also very inefficient because basically they like to say, you know, we need to attract the best people to manage the situations, but that's just wrong. I tell you why. Go back to the economical crisis of 2008. Remember, like all the super bankers with their super salaries, they just messed up. Super salary, but the banks, either they went bankrupt or they have been bailed out by taxpayers' money, okay? So back to Academic Senate early December. I made that point to Chancellor Kadi. I told her, you want to be a good leader? Well, you take the example of Nelson Mandela. Remember Nelson Mandela, president of South Africa just after the apartheid? What did he do when he arrived into power? He decreased his salary by 20% or maybe 30%. He decreased in salary. So I told that to Chancellor Kadi in front of the Academic Senate. And actually, I went just after the Academic Senate, just at the end. I asked her the question again, face to face. You know what she told me? That was interesting. You know, she started complaining, but you know, I got the lowest salary of the top 16 university chancellor. So she's comparing to people who are making. My question, it's okay, I'm getting there. So Chancellor Kadi is disconnected. And what happened here, it reflects what happened over the world. We have a majority of people taking over the resources, like power, financial resources. Okay, my question is this.
I'm sorry, but we've got two rows of people.
Okay, here's my question.
Could you ask the question?
My question is, don't you think we have too much police with too much rights?
No, wait 1 minute, please. I think we have to change the rules, and I won't allow more than about 3 minutes to have you ask a question, which I assume could be done in 30 seconds. So go on and ask the question.
That's my question. We have too much power for too few people. So for instance, don't you think like in the case of the police, we have like too much police with too much rights? That's my question.
Thank you very much. Maybe it's the mic. I didn't understand the question.
Okay, my question again is, don't you think we have too much police with too much or too many rights? Does that make sense?
Yeah. it's a question. I thought it was a statement.
No, that's a question.
Is, do the
But that could be a statement too.
Do the police have too much power?
Right.
Right? Okay, very good. Thank you for the question.
Sure. And what is your answer now?
Yes. Would anybody like to comment on that? Yeah.
I think our report identifies, our recommendation identifies a review that says, what is the right level of police? What is the right level of the sworn officers versus non-sworn officers? And I think the justice has made it clear that there's some disagreement here with the Bill of Rights, the Policeman's Bill of Rights, and that it doesn't properly serve the police force, and it doesn't properly serve the community. So I think there's consensus agreement on that belief.
Well, okay. No, but I mean, if you want, but
to answer your question, for this incident, yes.
Thank you.
Next question, please.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Justice.
Yes, and I guess I'm sorry to be limiting the time, but go on.
Well, Justice, I'm a United States Marine, and I got a skull fracture in Fallujah, so I'll do the best I can to be brief, but if you interrupt me, it's going to take me longer.
Yep.
Okay, my name's Nathan Vasquez. I'm an undergrad here at the university. I am a United States Marine Corps veteran. I served in Operation Iraqi Freedom. I served in Operation Enduring Freedom. I served in Operation Kosovo Force. I was an infantry Marine. I was qualified. It was OC spray that these officers used, was it not? Yeah, let's not call it pepper spray, because OC spray is completely different than pepper spray. To be qualified to handle this non-lethal weapon, we had to go through qualification every year. And I can tell you, as someone that's been shot at, that's been mortared, that's been in an IED accident, got a skull fracture in Fallujah, OC spray is the most excruciating pain I've ever felt in my life. Moreover, when I was in Kosovo in 2002, where the hostilities between the Serbians and the Albanians are still very hot, we were armed with OC spray, batons, shields, rubber bullets, and bean bags. There were bottles thrown at us. There were rocks thrown at us. I was hit several times. We were allowed to deploy OC spray 0 times in Kosovo. We were not allowed to deploy rubber bullets or beanbag rounds or any of these types of things in the fear that it might cause an international incident. So I stood there as a United States Marine serving my country and Constitution with a shield and a baton, and I stood there for my country, and I took those. I took the oath to support and defend my Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, just like those police officers did. My comment is, the way they handled this situation as a United States Marine and as a student of this university disgust me. That being said, a lot of people are going to make comments and questions here about how are we going to handle this with the police.
And that should lead you to a question.
Yes, sir. I'm getting right to it, Justice. Thank you. As someone that's familiar with military and police culture, I can tell you that, we can do what we can to solve this problem here, but, it's a cultural, sociological problem that we're going to have a hard time fixing. But one of the ways we can fix it is to address, we do have a criminal justice program here, do we not? And some of those police officers, I would wager, I don't know for sure, I would bet they graduated from this school. And also we have a law school here. What are we doing to make sure that the students we graduate and that we send into the police force and that we send into the legislature and that we send to be lawyers to defend the civil rights of others, what are we doing in our academic programs, in our pedagogy, to make sure that the students we are producing will not reproduce these same tragedies?
That's a very good question. Would somebody on the task force like to, and you did give me your name earlier,
Nathan Vasquez.
Yes, sir, thank you. Would somebody like to comment on that? I take it you're talking more about undergraduate training.
Well, yeah, I would hope that we're going to take this as an institution of education, that this is going to some way inform how we educate our students.
To first respond to one of the things you said, the majority of the police officers that work for UC DPD are not from UC Davis.
Okay.
They're not even from Davis. They're actually from different municipalities, and they come to work on the university campus. So they come from locales that may be a city So they might be a locale, they'd be in a different city from LA, and then they're sent to Davis. So that is one problem that personally I think is a problem, and the task force agrees is a problem, the way that we recruit our officers. So that could be the first step that we take to, I guess, create better community efficacy on this campus. As for undergraduate achievements and recommendations for building a more beautiful world, personally, I think that's a personal decision. The university will teach you what the university is supposed to teach you. Your teacher will teach you what you're supposed to teach you. The decision to be a good person is a personal decision. And as for the requirements and diversity training and things of that sort that the university is giving to UC students, to be honest, your diversity requirement can be fulfilled with a nutrition class. So you tell me what's going on.
Thank you very much. On the other side?
Hi, my name is Tom, and I'll try to be brief here to give everyone else a chance to speak. I thought that the bulk of the report had some very powerful statements and was very detailed about who made certain statements and who was in conflict, and it was very detailed. But I found the recommendations to be kind of vague and focused more on policy. So I understand that you are unable to recommend specifically disciplinary actions, but I guess I wanted to speak to and question the level at which the report was detailed in terms of who was clearly out of the principles of community, and then how that didn't really get reflected in the recommendation in terms of the recommendations were about policies and about changing structure. When I raised the question, would those people have done anything different in different structures? If the policies were tweaked, would the police officers still not have done their actions?
Would a task force member would like to respond to that? Go on.
Sure.
Identify yourself when you answer too.
Sorry, I forgot. My name's Rebecca Sterling. One of the things we discussed is that the policy is to shape the culture that we have within our police department and within our campus, and that was the idea behind that. Also, some of the reason that you'll see some policy reviews and analyses in the recommendation section is because as a task force, we frequently discussed that many of us our expertise is not in the policing world and is not in that kind of judicial world relating to police practices and procedures, and that it would be inappropriate for some of us to dictate the best policies and practices, but to have a professional and expertise review done would help to establish that and move forward in that appropriate direction.
I'd just like to add that our policies also throughout indicate the involvement of the entire community, students and staff and so on, so that once the policies are passed, it's something that there's a community of interest in doing it, not just having to be from the top down. And so it seems to me that our responsibility actually was to do precisely what we did, and that is to recommend the policy and structural differences that needed to be done so that these things don't happen again. You know, because it wasn't our job to say, you know, fire so-and-so and things will be better. Your suggestion, I think, is a real suggestion. That is, you can have good policies and not be followed. But our recommendation still is that we have good policies, but based on input from all of the different communities within the UC Davis community, so they will be followed. Yeah, okay. Yes, sir.
Yes, my name's Sean Gear. I'm a graduate student in the Department of Sociology. First of all, I wanted to comment that this isn't an isolated incident. I know other people have commented before, but the committee has focused a lot on finding individual fault, and that might be taken by some people to think that this is an isolated incident when rather this has been something that's been going on in all of the University of California campuses, including this one for the past, I don't know, at least since 2005, at least since I've been paying attention. There's a student tased in 2006 at UCLA, a rather brutal camp takedown in Santa Cruz. Here on this campus in 2009, we had a massively expensive mutual aid action that led to 52 students being arrested here. And this incident in November 18th cannot be taken in isolation with the rest of that. There are cultural and policy realities in the University of California that lead things to be very hostile protesting. And in that reason also, I'm really sad that the committee didn't decide to look more at how the university decides to discipline protesters, because the university has decided to, or has used extreme physical and legal means in the case of chalking being prohibited in Irvine and Berkeley, and currently with the banking protests, instead of using this judicial affairs system to take it outside of the university, not inside like the president said.
Right.
So this is actively discouraging First Amendment rights, protests on this campus, and okay, question. Recently, I believe it's the chief of UCLA police has submitted a report to UC Berkeley about their November 9th protests, which are very similar to ours, which in many cases advocated the proactive use of pepper spray as being a better response to batons. I was wondering as to the committee's thoughts as to whether this report is applicable to UC Davis, seeing as that they were very similar situations. I'm also curious as to police on this campus spend 6 months over at the medical center in Sacramento. And do you believe that that separates the police from our community in some way on campus? And does that cause them to become disconnected and not recognize students as being students when most administrators see that?
Thank you. Penny, you've been concerned about the broad issue raised earlier about the fact that this is not the only incident and so on. Would you like to comment on that part of the concern expressed?
I'm not sure if I'm going to completely comment in the way that you are hopeful, but when we talk about the importance, and it really is germane to the previous question about what practice is appropriate for a medical center campus or a student campus, a more fully student campus like this, I think we have to think about the whole review that we need for the police. And when we talk about the two parallels of the way that we want the processes to improve is it's all kinds of not just competency training with the equipment they're using, but talking about what their job descriptions need to look like. Have we reviewed that? Is the challenge different? Are we recruiting the right people to do the right job? So it's not just the skill mix that we're talking about of the ratios of sworn officers to the Aggie hosts, but is it appropriate to rotate to a medical center campus versus, the student campus? Is it a different skill set? Are they not really easily cross-trained, or are they? And this is where we felt we needed the expertise, and that really connects to the other expertise we need when we look at all the campuses and mutual aid and how we get that and how we assure that the response is appropriate to our principles of community that are so important to preserve.
Yes.
Yeah, I would like to address the question you raised about the recent publicity about the Berkeley report. That was an internal affairs investigation report. And there is a separate internal affairs process going on here as well, which can result and may result, I don't have any personal knowledge, in disciplinary action against the police officers. I don't think that review under the Berkeley Internal Affairs has any bearing on what we've recommended. I think our recommendations are far more comprehensive and address a much broader set of circumstances than that report did, and quite candidly, I don't think it's particularly relevant to the Davis circumstance.
I hope I'm right in calling on that line first.
Thank you. My name is Ethan Evans. I'm a graduate student in sociology. And one of the things that hasn't been addressed already that I wanted to ask about is there are two parts to this report. There's your summary after an investigative report. Both have sets of recommendations. We've heard concern that the recommendations here from this task force are a little broad, right? So we know that there was a weapon use that's not authorized, but there's no recommendation to call for an inventory of all the weapons or equipment that the police department has. That's a concern that that level isn't there. And the second part of the report, this investigation does have very specific recommendations, such as a system-wide, or moving towards a system-wide police force that is not based on each campus. And so I'm trying to understand where do one set of recommendations stop and the other begin, and how those will be used, because I find that very concerning. It's not something you echo in your report, so I'm just not sure where these different types of recommendations sit within this document.
I'd like to speak to that, your question and concern about the broadness and the specificity of our recommendations. We really did, as my colleague Dan Dooley said, we did recommend a full review of the police department, and that would include weapons and equipment and all of that. So that was intended to include all of that. I think a question earlier was frustration that our report looked at this particular incident, and that was our charge, to look at this particular incident. But we do have a looking forward report that is coming out from our colleagues Chris Edley, Dean Edley, and Charlie Robinson, and that report will be issued very shortly in draft form for folks to comment on, which is something that will look at policies and practices across the system. So I hope that all of you, when that report comes out, will give feedback to that, because that will help us across the system as well as here at UC Davis.
Thank you.
Maybe just more directly, how much weight are given to these Kroll recommendations within this document?
I'm sorry, how much weight what?
Or in what way are the separate Kroll recommendations that are listed in this document to be considered?
Well, we took seriously all the recommendations, and we attached it, as you know, as our exhibit. So those recommendations will go not only to the chancellor, but to the president of the university also. And as you saw, sometimes their recommendations were more specific than ours, because we indeed focused on policy. So no, but those will go forward. I thought I saw, yeah.
Carolyn Penny, I just wanted to add to that the Kroll investigation, the Kroll report came to us with their findings of fact and their recommendations. We then took that information and used it, as you'll see in our report, strongly as the basis for our description and our recommendations. So if we did not pick up word for word on a Kroll report, part of why we included it is that those recommendations sit side by side. It's not to negate any of their recommendations.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. Over here, yes, sir?
Yeah, I'm Brian McPartland, and I'm a senior at Davis. And I think just a few things that I noticed that were kind of left out, and I just wanted to bring up some concerns of mine.
Sure.
I was there the day they were pepper sprayed, and I was interviewed by the police about what happened that day. And yes, there was a short, brief time. I mean, there was a time where the police were not completely surrounded, but there was a time also they all linked arms, got around the police, and collectively said as a group, if you let them leave, we will let you go.
Yeah, right.
Which implies that if you don't let them go, we won't let you go.
Right.
And so I think that raises a big issue with what happened that day. I mean, what are they supposed to do in that situation? Secondly, there have been a number of disturbances on this campus.
Yeah. Let me just mention that we did comment on that in the report.
Okay.
So you might take a look at what we said.
Yeah. There were a number of other disturbances on campus other than just that incident and stuff. I was sitting in class, and they're disrupting classrooms, banging on doors, holding the doors open. They constantly shut down U.S. Bank on campus, who is paying good money to be on campus, and also employs students. So, and actually, I've heard rumors that there might be a lawsuit against UC Davis with U.S. Bank because of what happened in our failure to actually protect the bank that is paying good money to be on this campus for the next 10 years. So my question is, and then the one day I went into Dutton Hall, and I was trying to work on getting some stuff worked out for financial aid, and they occupied that building and had it shut down for that day. So there's a number of issues to movements on campus and them shutting down things for students on our services. So how are we working to just deal with those type of issues?
Well, and there has not been an identification of exactly how to deal with those. That's why we recommend that the leadership group, in fact, get together with the various elements of the Davis community, the students and others, because the main job of a university is to teach. And if there's an interference with that, I think that's a real concern. So that's why we recommend that those matters be decided upon by the getting together of the various units within the university, and then have clear guidelines, not only about the rules, but about the consequences, because I think the issues that you raise are serious one in light of the principal responsibility of the university to teach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that our university just needs to be able to hold people responsible for their actions, and for shutting down the availability of students to be students and do stuff on campus.
Yeah, we're quite specific on that recommendation, that not only that folk get together and sort of agree what the rules are going to be in this sort of new type of protest, but then what the consequences will be if there's a violation of the rules that everybody has agreed to. So we were, in that regard, very much looking toward the future.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, yes. Over there. I'm sorry, we have a comment here. Yeah, one comment is that we want mics that work.
Sorry. So we do emphasize the principles of community and free speech doctrine, which is you have the freedom to express your own opinion, whatever that opinion may be. And there is this whole debate versus what free speech, correct speech, freedom of speech, what all of that means. But I think that it means that we have to be respectful of other people's opinions. And I would just like to say that is constant with the free speech doctrine and the principles of community. I think that gentleman was talking to that, and that there are many students who have many students, staff, and faculty who have varying opinions on this campus, and everybody, their voice has a right to be heard. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. Hold on, please. One at a time. Alan, you've commented on the importance of the rules, not only qua rules, but because they actually protect the First Amendment. Would you like to comment on that? Alan teaches constitutional law at the law school.
No. Can everyone hear me? Does this work?
No. Don't think so.
Testing.
With it.
Maybe I should
Can you
pick
hear me
up the
now?
ones that aren't working.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I think there are really serious questions about what the rules should be in our community and how the First Amendment applies to expressive activities on our campus. And some of the rules are designed not to suppress speech, but to protect speech. I mean, a lot of time, place, and manner rules exist to make sure that everyone gets an opportunity to speak, and the people who shout the loudest aren't the only people who have the floor and have the ability to be heard. So I think it's a mistake to view rules as simply suppressing expressive activity, because in many cases, they're designed to promote and allow a diverse community to express diverse views. The other point I would make, which I think several people have already mentioned, is that whatever your views are and however you think they ought to be expressed, there are people on this campus who disagree with you. And they will insist that their interests be respected as much as your interests are respected. So we have to develop a framework where people who disagree can coexist in our community. and go about their business. And I don't think that's an easy job to do. But I think that's what we were trying to recommend with some of the general policy recommendations in this report. And I just want to go back. Somebody asked whether we thought pepper spray would be better than batons or vice versa, that was a recommendation of some Berkeley report. Well, I think the focus of this report is that we want to develop a community where the police don't use either. And we have a sufficient consensus on how we can live and work together so that when the police are involved, we don't have to use violence or force.
Very good. Thank you. Over there, yes, sir?
Hi, thank you. My name is Dave Harris. I'm a graduate student in population biology. My question is mainly about the police culture that you mentioned, the bunker mentality and questions about protecting officers versus upholding the law and when those come in contact. So it's reading the report and reading about what happened afterwards. Pardon? Reading the report and reading about what happened afterwards with the lawsuit and so on, it seems from the outside that the officers don't realize they have a problem. They don't realize that waiting until the last minute to delay the report as much as possible, or telling us in November, you can't judge us until the report comes out, then refusing to participate in the report in January, and then delaying the report as much as possible in March, that doesn't make us be able to function as part of a community where we're trying to protect ourselves, each other, be somewhere where we all feel safe. Do the officers realize that when they take potentially lethal force, there are rules that govern those, and they're rules for a good reason. They're not PhD eggheads off in Sacramento or Davis trying to tell them, you know, here's what you need to do on the ground every single minute. This is important. They didn't fill out any of the entire sections of the plan that they were supposed to be using on November 18th. These rules are there for a reason. How do we make sure that they realize that they have a problem, they need to fix it? And it's not just that we're trying to tell them what to do and make them into the bad guys. How do we make this actually work going forward?
Yeah. Pat, you've had experience on this. Would you like to respond to that? If you can find a proper mic.
I'll give it a try. Is that working? I guess I would amplify what you've heard earlier about our overall recommendation about this police department, and that is there were basic errors that were made, and that shouldn't happen. And in fact, what we believe is that our police department here at UC Davis should be a model that other universities come to look to say, how should we do it? We're a ways from there. But one of our recommendations is that we move towards that we employ the latest evidence-based practices, and where those evidence-based practices don't exist, that we develop them. We're a research institution. Let's take the steps necessary to be a model for other institutions. And so again, when you're focusing on specific areas, we think those are covered in that broad general recommendation, which is we've got a long ways to go, but we've got a target in mind that this be a model policing department in terms of a university environment.
How do you do that? How do you make someone follow or believe in or decide that rules are worth considering, as opposed to seat of your pants, protect yourself, cover your ass after the fact?
Well, I think it's going to be very much a long-term, structural, cultural issue that's going to have to be sustained. It won't happen overnight, but it's definitely a goal worthy of striving for.
Yeah, there was a comment made.
The Crow people were experienced police officers. They were gassed.
Is the mic working?
It's working. You're aiming to your face. Is this better? That's better. Okay, thank you. The Crow people were very experienced police officers. They had worked for decades for different municipal police departments. They were shocked at the way our police department operated.
Do you think there's any chance that our police department will listen?
I think we could redesign our police department. We could provide much better training than we currently provide. And I think part of the proof of that is that you have experienced police officers who would look at what our department did and say, that's not what other well-trained, experienced police officers do in similar situations. So someone said that the police officers seem to be encircled and threatened, and I think the opinion of the Kroll investigators was, that's ridiculous. Any trained and experienced police force could have been able to handle that situation without resorting to violence or pepper spray. And we agree. as a task force.
Yeah, and we even suggested there be special training for university officers because, as I mentioned earlier, we think that their role is really quite different than a city or county officer, and yet even the folk who deal with the city and counties say that our officers did not perform the way they should have on that occasion. Yeah, so thank you. Yeah.
There are two major recommendations that the task force reached that I think have been sort of touched on over and over again. The number one recommendation in the list is this campus needs to have a clear policy regarding civil disobedience, First Amendment rights, and the police's ability and right to meet either of these kinds of things, right? We don't have that right now, and we think there ought to be such a thing, and that would make things a lot easier for everyone. The second thing was that there needs to be a complete soup to nuts review of the police department. I don't think you're going to find anybody on this stage that will disagree with you. Now you ask what will make them listen? Well, it's going to require that the campus leadership make them listen.
Yeah. That's not our job. Let's see. I think this is time to have me call on this line, though I want to tell you that this session was scheduled to go till 5, as I understand it, so we may not hear from everybody. However, I've already gotten calls from students who want to meet again. I assume they would welcome folk to come, and the University Senate wants to meet with me and some of us, and I'm sure they would welcome other folk to come. So there will be other opportunities, but I did want to forewarn you that we've only got about 7 minutes to go. Yes, sir.
So you should have received notifications that we are having 2 follow-up town halls next week, and we will. Members of the task force will be there.
Then you go, and then I'll go.
Okay.
Oh yeah, there's some leaflets. Pick them up.
All right. I will start with a question right off the bat.
Good heavens.
How many of you can all, I want the whole panel to answer. All you have to do is raise your hand. Besides whether encampment, the putting up of the tents represented something outside of the rules, do you each as individuals think that was also inherent in putting up the tents, a speech act? Yes or no? Anybody? Come on, you have a chance. You're independent. You're well able to make decisions about this. Nobody? Okay, let me ask another question. All right,
I'd like to address that.
No, let me. I have the floor. Let me ask another question.
Gee, I thought I had the floor.
You have someone who wants to answer your question here.
Go on.
I raised my hand because I've been here long enough.
I'm sorry.
I've been here long enough to see other forms of protest, and I was a student here once, many years ago, and I recall, and it was reminded. We were reminded. The task force was reminded many years ago. There were shanty towns built to protest apartheid and the universities.
I did one myself. I was there on the quad with the tent.
And it was recognized that. We did recognize that was a form of protest. That was a form of speech.
Speech, thank you. Okay, here's my second question. How come this issue isn't addressed in your report at all? I don't see anything about it. What I see is some very good, insightful things about what went wrong. That's question number 2. Question number 3, would it have been great if the chancellor hadn't made a misjudgment and if the police chief had spoke up a bit more, and the tents would have been taken away at 3 a.m. And there never would have been a pepper spray, and there never would have been this panel. And UC Davis, so what is this about? Go back to the chancellor's own words. They're not protesting in a vacuum. I think you've succeeded well on as you understood your task, but you didn't look outside the frame to why this whole thing happened, and why that pepper spray happened is because the university is not functioning even to take care of its own students effectively in the world that we have. How can it function on deciding all the rest of those questions when the brightest people in the land want to stay safely inside their own box? What was the chancellor's big reason for not going with the police chief? An idea about a party. Now, the fact that she came from Greece and, is not as familiar as some people, she might have made that choice anyway. Somebody that grew up in Davis and became chancellor might have made that same choice. But I wonder if it would have. And not to ask that question, not to look back, at the source of this, the root of it, which was students felt to put up tents. Now, if we want to question about whether tents are speech or not, and whether they are civil or not, or rude, or impacting somebody, then you have to compare that with the opposition's position, which was pepper spray. And to take 3-4 months to do this, and a big panel. Look at this room. Another question, who was here in November? This room was full and packed out the door. If you wanted to put this as a non-issue for the university, put it behind the university, this was a great way to do it. Combination, and you know, all of you have the highest credentials, especially the Chief Justice. There's nothing, and Professor Bornstein, there's nothing about your credentials that isn't right, and the students.
Well, I do want to point...
I'm just going to quit.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I've had my say, but...
No, I do want to point out that, in fact, we discuss all of what we consider those poor judgments, which is what you're referring to, and I think you do find those in the report.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
and I was pleased to see that.
Yeah.
I think it's very insightful. And the one thing I would say is, you talked a little earlier about the right skill set. Look at our chancellor. Her skill set is what? It's to get tens and hundreds of millions of dollars for this campus. It's not to understand the undergraduate students, because they're the product of this campus. They're the service.
Sir, do you have a
That's what
question,
people
or can
are-
we move on to another
I'm
student
done.
question? Thank you so
Okay,
much.
Thank you. You actually had 2 questions in. Over there, and I'm just going to take one more over there and one more over here. I'm sorry. Yes?
There's a few things I'd like to pick up on. One, if the police are not trained, why are they still walking around with their weapons on this campus? If they are already failing us, why are they still allowed to be around us? As a person pepper sprayed and now being persecuted by the school for another act, possibly, then why are these police officers still around? That's unacceptable. And if you took serious recommendations for the basis of this task force, then why did you ignore over 100,000 people who called for the resignation of Chancellor Katehi? I really would wonder, this report has done its work, right? It was to buy Katehi time and let this uproar die away. Now there are known mechanisms to hold her accountable despite the contents of the report. This same administration and these same police are now prosecuting some of the pepper spray victims and trying to imprison them for up to 11 years. And among those, one of the professors who's being prosecuted was the only one that day, as I was blinded and kneeling on the floor, who came to me and washed out my eyes and carried me away from those police officers. Why is the university now prosecuting him? The only principled person that day, the only person who helped me, why is the school now prosecuting him? When Katehi is walking around, when the police are walking around with the same abilities they had before, nothing has happened. This report should have changed something. It hasn't changed anything. How could this be?
Well, you know what? I think the president of the university knew what he was doing when he asked us not to make recommendations on who gets punished, if you will.
Yeah, because no one gets punished
No,
then.
wait, because that is clearly one of the protections under the law. And, you know, I repeated more than once that we've been subject to some, in my view, bad laws, that the police do have some protection. So I think he was trying to frame the questions to us.
What about the administration?
So we could get the report out immediately.
But this wasn't
It
immediate,
turned out
and the
that it
administration's
didn't
still
work
the
out
same.
that way because of the lawsuit. But we were prepared, as you may know, what, months ago to issue the report.
Okay, the police aside, with their union aside,
Yeah.
what about the administration? Why has Katehi, she's not even here today. What is going on? If you are all educated and so forth and should have a conscience and be of principle,
Well-
don't you recognize this report took too long? Don't you
well-
recognize the bureaucratic ways that have pushed aside what's really important right now?
We're going to meet with the chancellor herself and go over the matters that I just mentioned a minute ago, the mistakes that were made, the lack of judgment, et cetera, et cetera. You know, we call these things as we saw them, and we're not apologetic about it, and we'll meet with the people that we've criticized.
Yeah, and on April 27th, I'll meet with the district attorney's office for the same violence against me of this university, and nothing is being held accountable for that. No one is being held accountable for that. What about that silent violence?
I think we have a comment. Incidentally, the students in our task force were very active.
So I'm going to be really honest and really candid. We've been here for almost an hour. There's no reason to lie to you. I'm not going to discount anything you said, because in reality, the vast majority of it is pretty true. And to be completely honest with you, employment contracts would not permit such things to happen. Kate, he's not going anywhere. She is our chancellor, and she will remain our chancellor until she does something horrendously illegal. As it stands right now,
what about the pepper
As it
spray?
stands right now, that's not what happened due to university policy. So the answers that you're looking for are not going to be found on this task force,
Then you shouldn't
because
be
we're
on
not
it.
allowed
This
to
task
do
force
those
shouldn't
things.
exist. If you can't accomplish anything, what is your purpose?
Go ask Katehi. I can't answer everything.
No, ask yourselves, why did you take the time to be part of these measures that will do nothing? They'll do nothing.
Then why did you show up?
To complain about this. What do you mean why? Because my eyes still hurt, because I'm still being subjected to the violence of this university, and I won't stand it.
Our job was to point fingers and say what happened.
Why
we
did
can't
I
do
show
anything
up?
more than that.
Were you hoping I wouldn't show up? Were you hoping
Not even a little bit.
No one else showed up. There's no one here right now. So you got what you wanted.
You know, I do a lot of arbitrations, so let me just say, both of you have an excellent point. You're here to make your point, and I think, and it's well taken, and our committee member here is to indicate what our role was.
I just like to speak for some of the people who are
in the hope that it would do some good, as I think it will. And I'm sorry, I'm going to take only one more, and it'll be from this side.
I have to say this for somebody because she's legally not allowed to say this. The majority of the people who were pepper sprayed that day are now, as you all well know, unable to comment on this report because they're being prosecuted by the university for the very same thing, but by the Yolo County Court. So they no longer have a voice. The majority of the people sitting there cannot even comment on what's just happened on the Renoso report, because on April 27th, they're being called by the Yolo County Superior Court to appear for protesting the privatization of the university. The administration has changed tactics, and this has all happened at a time where we've gone from pepper spray, from OC spray, to now these same students and same professors are being targeted by the court. So now the residents of Yolo County are paying for this same kind of prosecution to go on. So it's being moved, and most of the people who really have something to say to this report cannot legally even comment on it. And I think that that's very important, the timing of when this finally did come out.
Well, thank you very much, even though you do recognize that you...
It's okay. I have to speak.
That you went against the ground rules for this meeting. But that's all right. Let me just call on this gentleman who will be the last questioner.
Hi, my name is Ben Cisneros. I'm a law student at King Hall, and my question is actually on pretty similar grounds. You guys make a lot of great recommendations for developing rules and policies for campus protests and civil disobedience with principles like broadly accepted agreements and community dialogue. Something absent from your recommendations is an increased reliance on criminal charges in dealing with student protesters. That's exactly the tactic that the university has taken in the wake of November's incident. So my question is, if anybody on the task force is willing to call that tactic a mistake or wrong in charging student protesters with crimes that can amount to 11 years in prison, and if anybody's willing to call on the Yolo County District Attorney to drop the charges against UC Davis students and faculty for on-campus actions.
Yeah. Well, you know, that came up once before in the campus of Irvine University, because there was a protest there. And I disagreed with what happened there in terms of bringing in the law enforcement people, and I confess that I disagree with what this campus has done. You know.
Thank you, Justice.
Yeah. Very good. Thank you all for coming. And I can understand the impatience, which we've had more than once, but I think it's been very important to hear what you all have to say and to have you hear what we had to say in terms of this report. So again, thank you all very much for coming.